Strong words from the dad of the high school cheerleader found dead on a Carnival cruise ship. Anna Kepner went on a cruise with her family, but it ended, according to reports, with her being strangled to death in the stateroom she allegedly shared with her stepbrother. What Kepner's dad has just said, reportedly, about the teen labeled by his own family as a suspect in his daughter's death. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. Hey guys, before we get into this episode of On the Case, I want to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm. A firm with more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. Click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. Not only has the world learned very graphic and sad alleged details about what allegedly happened to Anna Kepner aboard the Carnival cruise ship Horizon, the world is also learning the details of family drama that this family probably never expected would become news. But now, almost a month after Kepner's body was found aboard the ship, it's all coming to light as we wait to see if the FBI will make an arrest in connection to the 18-year-old's death. Now, Kepner's family has said that her 16-year-old stepbrother is a suspect in Anna Kepner's death. And according to ABC News, her death has been labeled a homicide. The FBI hasn't arrested anyone at the time of this recording in connection to her death, but what Kepner's dad just said in his most recent interview is turning the heat up even more on that young boy, the 16-year-old stepson. Now, before I get to those statements, you need to understand what we know at this point about what allegedly happened. ABC News said that Anna's family told them that she died of a bar hold, someone reportedly putting their arm across her neck, strangling her to death. That person, according to her own family, may be her 16-year-old stepbrother. Now, the boy is the biological son of her stepmom, who's named Chantel Hudson, now Chantel Kepner, and she is married to Anna's biological dad. Now, Anna's grandparents say there were a total of 9 family members on the Carnival cruise ship. It's a 4,000 passenger ship, 15 decks, and it left Miami for a 6-day cruise to multiple stops in the Caribbean. Her grandparents, they spoke to ABC News. They said that this cruise, it was a new tradition that really was supposed to celebrate this blended family that was brought together by Anna's dad and Anna's stepmom. One of the stepmom's kids is that 16-year-old boy. Now, he's a minor, so we're not naming him, but if he's ever charged and tried as an adult, that information could come to light. Now, I'm going to talk about how his age could play into a potential criminal case in just a moment. But just a reminder, as we get into what's been reported in this case, it's a very fluid situation. The FBI has not said much beyond just confirming that they are investigating a death on board the ship. That's about all that Carnival Cruise Lines has said as well. Now, I want to show you this. This is the death certificate for Anna Kepner. This was obtained by Fox News. It doesn't list her cause of death, but it does say her body has been cremated. Her memorial service was held in Titusville, Florida, east of Orlando. That's where she's from. Now, it's believed that Anna's 16-year-old stepbrother is a suspect because that's what came out of his parents' attorney's mouth.
The older child, who's approximately 16 years of age, is a suspect in the death of the stepchild, an 18-year-old daughter that was in the same room.
Now, that's a moment from a custody hearing in Florida involving Kepner's stepmom and her ex-husband. Now, that's been going on, this custody situation, for more than a year since they separated, and it's unrelated. Their custody dispute has been going on for more than a year. But the attorney for Anna Kepner's stepmom's ex-husband said that he was told by the stepmom that the 16-year-old is a suspect in Kepner's case. Now, that custody case is expected back in court in Florida this week, and we're going to continue to monitor that. The final days of Anna's life are believed, according to family members, to have played out something like this. Let's go to November 6th. It's one of the last days of the cruise, and Kepner reportedly wasn't feeling well. Her grandparents told ABC that she had braces that were bothering her, so she called it an early night. And that brings us to November 7th. That's the next day. Kepner's family got up for breakfast, but Anna didn't show. Her grandfather said that he was getting bingo cards when he heard a medical emergency announcement over the loudspeaker, and he recognized the room number. Then, around 11 in the morning, and this is according to the Daily Mail, there's a maid who entered Anna's stateroom, and that is when her body was found. Her body allegedly, quote, was found wrapped in a blanket, covered over with life jackets, and stuffed under a bed. ABC News said that Anna had been strangled. An arm, allegedly across her neck, had killed her. There is reportedly no evidence of sexual assault, they report, or drugs and alcohol being in her system. Now, the ship returned to port on November 8th, and that's when Kepner's body was taken off of the ship and transported to the medical examiner's office in Miami-Dade County. This is video per WSVN TV from reporter Sheldon Fox. Now, what Anna's relationship was with her stepbrother, that seems to be up for debate, because on one hand you have friends and her ex-boyfriend, his family, telling Inside Edition that the stepbrother was, quote, obsessed with Anna and not in a good way. He said, quote, she was scared of him because he always carried around a big knife. He also said that his son, who was Anna Kepner's ex-boyfriend, once saw the stepbrother go into Kepner's room during a FaceTime call, quote, when she was sleeping and get on top of her, end quote. He also said he's like infatuated, attracted to her like crazy. He always wanted to date her. This all to Inside Edition. Now, the ex-boyfriend also told the media outlet that Anna was so afraid of her stepbrother that she actually would sleep at friends' houses. Now, Anna's grandparents, in their interview to ABC, and we got in touch with them, and they said they're not talking anymore at this point. So this ABC interview is kind of all we have to go with from their perspective, at least at this point in time. They told ABC News that Anna and her stepbrother actually had a great relationship. They described it as a real brother-sister type relationship, even going as far to say as they were, quote, two peas in a pod. So knowing that there is a little bit of a back and forth in terms of what Anna's relationship was with her stepbrother, let's talk about what Anna's dad is now saying. Chris Kepner, who is Anna's biological dad. He was on the ship. He is the stepfather of the 16-year-old boy. According to Chris Kepner, he says, quote, I do not stand behind what my stepson has done, end quote. Now, he also said he wouldn't confirm or deny any knowledge about what his stepson allegedly did. This was according to an interview that he gave to People magazine. Now, Kepner also said, quote, I want him to face the consequences. I will be fighting to make sure that does happen. People then asked him whether he thinks his stepson is responsible for his daughter Anna Kepner's death, and he says, quote, I cannot say that he is responsible, but I can't decline. He was the only one that was in the room, and the FBI has an ongoing investigation in which they will have to provide the evidence to say that he did do it or did not do this, end quote. Now, he also said he thought of his stepson as a normal kid who was close with his daughter, and he never thought something like this could happen. Joining us now to talk more about this case is Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Thank you for being with us. So much attention now on this stepbrother, who is 16 years old. He's a minor. But to this point, with everything that's been reported, and even coming from Anna Kepner's own family, at the time we're recording this, he's not charged. Why do you think that is?
I'm surprised he hasn't been charged. And obviously, this is a cruise ship case, which means that the FBI is going to be involved, and it's going to be a federal case to the extent that there's a prosecution. And the feds tend to move a little more slowly, not because they're not qualified or they don't take these cases seriously. Federal prosecutors are used to handling proactive cases as opposed to reactive cases. So what does that mean? Typically in state court, state prosecutors or county prosecutors, police arrest someone, a report is prepared, and prosecutors get the file. They're reacting to a crime that's already been committed. Oftentimes, federal prosecutors, they're proactively investigating a criminal organization. So they're really used to waiting until the case is bulletproof before they go to the grand jury and get an indictment. I'm not saying that's the reason why the delay is happening in this case, but federal prosecutors tend to be a little bit more cautious than their state counterparts. So that may be one of the reasons why there's been a delay here.
And Kepner, Anna Kepner's stepbrother is 16 years old, so he's not an adult, but he could be facing some pretty serious charges if he's the one who is charged in connection to what has been reportedly happened, what reportedly happened to Anna Kepner. How could his age factor into what a prosecution could look like?
Well, it makes a huge deal. If he's prosecuted as an adult for murder, he'll be facing many of the same consequences that anyone else would. Obviously, you can't face the death penalty when you're a minor, but other than that, the case would proceed on the same route. If he is not prosecuted as an adult, that'd be a very different situation altogether. He'd face little to no criminal justice under our federal system.
What would go into him being charged as an adult in the federal system compared to what we would see if this was a case that happened on land and it was a county jurisdiction that was prosecuting the case?
So prosecutors need to weigh the different factors here, right? The age of the defendant, the nature of the conduct, any prior criminal history, and they make a determination whether this is someone who needs to be prosecuted and punished as an adult or needs to be rehabilitated as a child. So there's a whole set of factors that go into that determination, and prosecutors are going to have to weigh really what happened here, right? Doesn't seem like this was an accident. If really the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, right? It's not like someone overdosed or there was an accident. If Anna Kepner was choked out by her brother, I mean, that usually is something that's intentional. I don't know anything about this stepson and what his history is, if he's engaged in any sort of violence before, what statements he's made to law enforcement. But those are all facts that prosecutors are going to have to consider in deciding what to do in a case like this.
There is a line from his grandparents. They gave an interview to ABC News, and one of the sound bites that stood out to me from their interview was saying that the stepson, the stepbrother of Anna Kepner, the 16-year-old, said something along the lines of he doesn't remember what happened, almost as if he blacked out. And they haven't said specifically they believe he's someone who took the life of Anna Kepner, but it's all been kind of like veiled statements. But that was one that stood out to me, that he just apparently blacked out, according to this report. How far does that defense go if this is a case where he's facing serious charges, if someone says, I don't remember what happened?
Chris, it's a defense in a case like this because we know for murder, you have to intend to kill, intend to inflict serious bodily injury, or show a depraved indifference to human life. That's malice murder under the law. Now, there's different ways, obviously, to get to murder. There's felony murder, there's conspiracy to commit murder. But, in your typical murder case, there's just two people involved in what seems to be a small room on a cruise ship. Those are the ways to get there. So if the stepbrother didn't intend to hurt Anna and suffered some sort of episode involuntarily, right? We know that, using drugs or alcohol voluntarily, that's not a defense, right? But if there was some sort of psychiatric or other mental health episode, that would be a defense to murder. So that's going to be very important in a case like this.
I've seen the family make some statements, and it appears that at least on the side of Anna Kepner's dad, that they're not going to make any more. At least that's what the grandparents told us when we tried to talk to them earlier this week. But Chris Kepner, the dad, just gave a statement, an interview, and I'm just going to pull up a couple of the sound bites. In an interview that was exclusive to People magazine, they were able to get in touch with him, and he says something along the lines, I'm just pulling up the quote here, I can't say that he is responsible, but I can't decline. He was the only one that was in the room, and the FBI has an ongoing investigation in which they will have to provide the evidence to say that he did do or did not do it at this time. And he also says, I want him to face the consequences. When it comes to a defense, when, at this point, we don't know what the defense would be. We don't exactly know other than reports of what happened in the room. But when you have the dad going on the record and saying that, does that impact what a defense could be?
Well, it does impact the case in that you want a victim who's desirous of prosecution or doesn't desire prosecution. That's a factor that prosecutors consider. But the case would be the United States of America versus stepbrother, right? biological dad is not a party to the case. He has a right to be heard. He has a right to be informed of court proceedings, but he can't dictate the case. When I was a prosecutor, and now I'm a current victim's lawyer, there were many times where, we would prosecute a case even though the victim didn't want the case to be prosecuted. Right? Domestic violence cases are probably the best example. Oftentimes, the victim doesn't want prosecution. We would proceed anyway. And sometimes victims do want prosecution, but there's some issue with the case, or it doesn't merit a criminal prosecution, or certainly not to the extent that the victim wants, right? For instance, I've represented victims of sexual assault, right? I'll go in the DA's office and, we'll try to present the evidence that we believe shows lack of consent, sexual contact. And sometimes DAs will tell me, you know what, Nima, it's a he said, she said. I don't think we have enough to prove the case beyond reasonable doubt. So the victims can't dictate the case one way or another. They have a right to be heard, but ultimately those decisions are made by prosecutors.
The other part of this too that I found fascinating is a lot of the information is coming out of, for example, the custody hearing. That was the stepmom, and she's been in a custody dispute with her ex-husband, it seems like, for more than a year, but that information comes out that this stepson is a suspect in the case. What do you make of that development where you have on one hand the criminal investigation, the FBI has been tight-lipped, but then on the other hand you have these other avenues where all this information is going into the public?
Yeah, well, court proceedings generally are public. There's some exceptions, obviously, cases involving juveniles, those tend to be sealed, but that's right. So something's filed in court, can be criminal court, civil court, or in this case, family court. Oftentimes those filings are public and they are accessible. So if you say something in a court document, even if it's related to a completely different case, that may shed some light on what is going on in an investigation that's otherwise closed. So obviously very different case, but I'm here in Los Angeles, right? There was a proceeding in the David case, the David Celeste Rivas, where, law enforcement, they file something to try to keep a medical report sealed or make it so it's not available to the public, and they referenced a grand jury number. Well, now folks know there's a grand jury conceived, even though grand juries are supposed to be secret. So sometimes court filings will give information about other investigations or cases that are supposed to remain sealed or secret.
And I know you're not a criminal defense attorney, and would be someone who would defend this stepson based on the type of law you practice. But I think of them being on a cruise ship, and there's cameras everywhere. But then it gets to the point where it's just him and her apparently in the room, and she winds up dead. How do you defend that when it's very easy on the outside for the public to say, well, if she died by asphyxiation, she didn't do it to herself, and you were the only other person in the room, and we have cameras to prove that you were the only other person in the room?
It's a tough case to defend. So obviously I'd want to know what he said to law enforcement immediately after, or even really anyone on that cruise ship, right? Assuming for the purposes of this discussion that he's the only one that had access to her, and that there's no other way that she could have died but for him choking her out, then the question would be is, did he have the necessary intent, right? Is this something that we could argue was an accident, right? Obviously, it being an accident does potentially expose him to other charges, but the potential sentence for manslaughter for a 16-year-old is going to be significantly less than intentional murder. So if they were, wrestling or playing, I mean, they're brother and stepsister, right? Maybe they were violent, but he didn't have that criminal intent, that mens rea. That would be a win for anyone who's defending the stepbrother, in my opinion.
What goes into determining, right now, the FBI, federal prosecutors, they're figuring out, what exactly happened in this case? What would need to happen for this to be a manslaughter case instead of a murder case?
Yeah, it's really that intense. So oftentimes, again, assuming that the individual who's being charged is the killer, right? the person responsible for the death, you start looking at the different types of defenses, right? So we've talked about the difference between murder and manslaughter. I'll get more into it in a bit, but really, oftentimes in these cases, there's only one of three defenses, Chris. It wasn't me, and it sounds like that defense isn't going to work. It was self-defense, maybe, but obviously you have a boy versus a girl. There's a slight age difference, but usually you can't use deadly force unless you're in imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury. Maybe there's a self-defense argument here. I don't know. It doesn't sound like it. So then you start saying, I didn't mean to do it, right? If you didn't mean to do it, you didn't intend to kill, you didn't intend to inflict serious bodily injury. It was an accident, but you were grossly negligent, right? That may be manslaughter, or even simple negligence, depending on the jurisdiction, may also be manslaughter. Now, some jurisdictions, manslaughter with simple negligence may even be a misdemeanor. So obviously, we're talking about the federal system. Likely we're looking at felony manslaughter charges here, especially when you're talking about placing the arm around someone's neck. I can't see a circumstance where that would be just simple negligence. It's likely grossly negligent. But again, not intending to kill someone, but being grossly negligent, that significantly reduces the potential sentence under federal law.
How often did you, when you were a federal prosecutor, deal with cases on cruise ships?
We dealt with our fair share. I was a federal prosecutor in San Diego, and obviously there were plenty of cruise ships that departed from San Diego. Obviously, it's a big tourist spot. So we did deal with those types of cases. Obviously, there's some federal bases there as well. So we did deal with civilians committing crimes, including violent crimes, on those federal bases. But you're right, Chris, typically murder cases, 95% of the time, maybe even more, they're handled at the state level because they are state crimes.
And then when it comes to the relationship between Anna Kepner and her stepbrother, because the family, even her dad, says that the stepbrother, he seemed like a normal kid. The grandparents said, the stepbrother and Anna Kepner, they were two peas in a pod. But then you have her ex-boyfriend telling a very different story, that he was obsessed with her, that there was a very concerning type relationship, it seems. How do prosecutors kind of sift through that and actually get to the root of exactly what their relationship was, and how could that factor into how this case plays out?
Well, it's a huge factor, and we talked about the difference between intending to kill someone and it being an accident. There's a history of violence. There's some sort of motive to harm someone. That's all going to come in to not only the trial, but the determination of what to charge the stepbrother with, right? If there's a history, a pattern where he may have wanted to harm her for whatever reason, I mean, that's evidence of animus and intent to commit murder or inflict serious bodily injury. If their relationship was fantastic and they never had any issues with one another, the defense is going to say, well, there's no evidence of intent whatsoever. This was an accident, and accidents happen. It doesn't make it a crime, and it doesn't mean someone should go to federal prison for years or even decades.
And we'll see in this case, the wait at the time we're recording this continues to see if there will be charges in this case. Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, thank you as always for being with us on Law&Crime.
Of course. Thanks, Chris. Talk soon.
Again, we're going to keep a close eye on a scheduled custody hearing involving Anna Kepner's stepmom, slated for later this week in Florida. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.